Hey, you geeks! I I can't believe Iron Flame is only this thick of a book because Yarrows fit like an entire duology in here, and it's only half of Violet's second year. Like, originally, apparently, Yarrows pitched this series as a trilogy for Violet's 3 years, and now she has split it into five because Yarrows is taking this book train straight into epic fantasy territory, and that's what epic fantasy writers do. I love it. And although, as you're reading it the first time, it may feel like Yarros has jammed two books into one to create Iron Flame, by the time you reach the final sequence, like, it is just beautiful, glorious violence that drums up all the feels and pushes our characters to
The edge of the map, mate. Here there be monsters.
any more specific than that, and we get into spoiler territory, which I will now gladly dive into, doing a deep dive analysis of the main character's world building points, magic system, and of course, the plot. Violet. So, last book, I commended Violet for not being the typical epic fantasy protagonist because, well, she was really more of the typical romance kind of protagonist who was way more touchy feely than cold and rational. And now we're seeing that divide kind of break down in Violet as she herself breaks down after the trauma of finding out the world that she thought she was living in is a lie, seeing the truths long withheld from her come to life and kill one of her best friends in a way that she blames herself for his death, and then having to return back to the world of lies to pretend that nothing is wrong. Like, this is where the fun begins, boys and girls. At first, Violet tries to deal with the trauma as Xaden recommends, which is incidentally the same way so many fantasy protagonists deal with the trauma, and that is to distance yourself from the people that care about you because you can't lie to them. But Violet, being a typical romance protagonist, is not good at this. And thank the gods, Ree just pulls Violet into her room only a third of the way through the book and forces the truth out of her. Like, guys, you could have had up to 10 books of Violet being an angsty, aloof female dog, and instead, Ree is just a wonderful person. More gloating about that later. The quickest I've seen it done prior to this was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, complete with an evil psycho teacher to boot. But Yaris gets it done in half the time, which opens up for Violet proving that she won't break under torture, unlike some people, and Yaros makes a worse torture sequence more bearable to read, I must say. The second part, we're getting that good old-fashioned love triangle return, though this time it's the girls who have a rival. Not that Catriona is truly a rival to Violet in Xaden's affections, but Violet refuses to believe it for like the longest time, girl. And I understand that she hasn't been in Xaden's head and she doesn't know how madly in love with her he is. And you have people telling her that he doesn't fall in love with people, he lies. And I can see Violet's reason for doubting, but come on, girl, he tore apart a college, a country for you. And if that isn't a declaration of undying love, then I don't know what is. Of course, Violet takes all the blame for that, but does not reap any of the emotional boost that should give her. And instead of addressing some of her underlying insecurities with Xaden, she just is mad that he's forcing her to ask questions about things she wants to know. Now, I do empathize with her that sometimes it's hard to ask questions about things that you know nothing about. But Also, in the second half here, she has questions to ask, but she is not asking them for fear of the answers. So it's both a give and take that Yaros balances faults between our two protagonists evenly, and so I get to be annoyed at their flaws and encouraged by their growth together. In fact, I think my favorite scene between Violet and Xaden in this book is not the throne scene. The lead up to that scene is quite notable on its own, that I don't even need to have read the scene to have gotten the point. But instead, it's the sparring scene where Xaden gives her the knives and they set new rules about their relationship because Xaden is finally letting her in and she's finally asking questions. And it gives hope that they do actually have a healthy relationship dynamic just in time for that relationship to get challenged by the biggest problem yet, which is also both of theirs, yet mostly Xaden's fault. Dane. Well, Fridge. Not only did Dane get to do the I have a knife and might kill you, but actually not bit that gets me every time. He also took responsibility for his actions and is trying to make it up to Violet and helps her with the Wardstone project. So I can't hate him on principle anymore. Still not sure I like him, but I have to take him off the list of Gawain and F-Face, and I don't know how I feel about that, besides possibly replacing him with Nolan. The Iron Squad and Iron Scribe. Yaros keeping Violet's friends around to be her emotional support, I feel is revolutionary both for epic fantasy and romance, because here's where Bella gets consumed by the Cullen family and hangs out with vampires all the time. Or this is where Spencer launches off into space to go have fun with new alien friends, but leaving her squad behind on detritus. But no, Yaros has gifted both genres with Rhiannon, who don't care about genre convention, and makes Violet talk and stays by her side even when Violet pushes her away and misdirects her. And I do like how Violet is self-aware enough to know that she is doing to her friends what Xaden did to her, and it's the squad's unconditional acceptance of Violet despite her flaws that allows them to encourage her to do things that are better. So it's just beautiful. Not to mention, we get a whole host of new first years, including a prince who my reading buddy was disappointed did not come into the love triangle. Well, there's always next book. And love is in the air some more as Sawyer starts flirting with Jacinia, even though he doesn't speak sign language. I commended Yaros' last book for making her protagonist have an actual physical disability that relates to the real world. And in the same vein, I commend her for making Jacinia deaf and allowing that to impact the plot. For it makes sense that Violet would feel more comfortable approaching Jacinia, not only because they've been friends for longer, and not because Jacinia can't talk, but merely because it is easier, or I should say harder, for other people to overhear their conversations because it is easier to hide hand motions. And there is a beautiful history within epic fantasy of characters using sign language to have covert conversations while other people are in the room. Though until now, from what I can tell, everyone using those signs had been able to hear. And it makes it extra cute when Sawyer can't sign, so he has to learn to sign to flirt with her. Though, since the last guy who flirted on page with Jacinia was Liam, I was with Violet in very much worrying for Sawyer's safety. I don't blame Violet, therefore, for jumping off Taryn's back to save Sawyer. I do, however, blame her for sending Sawyer the flyers and Terran away and just standing on the ground outside of Basgiath, waiting basically for the Venom to attack. Fortunately for her, Indarna ensured she was never alone. Indarna. Last book, Terran and Indarna were just like too wonderful to be plot points. Like, Indarna was just the sweetest little child, so helpful. And Terran was just wonderfully grouchy, but so accommodating, really. There wasn't a lot for me to talk about besides general gushing. But now, Indarna has entered into her crazy, messed up teenage years with an attitude, and this is where we can dive on in, because she is now central to the plot and the resolution of not just Iron Flame, but probably the series as a whole now in ways that weren't very clear in the first book. Starting out, her and her dreamless sleep era in the first part of the book just totally drives up Violet's self-guilting complex that she's the reason that Indarna is sleeping longer and later can't fully extend her own wing. Then it's because of this Indarna is clearly going through like her own growth period with the elders paralleling what Violet is going through in her own stuff. So then when Indarna tags along on the adventure, it's not just for her to do her one trick, but rather to use a multiplicity of skills and save the day confronting Solus. Now, at first I wasn't quite sure how she beat Solus, but in hindsight, literally, as I wrote this review, it occurred to me after 3 times through the book that between Solus's one eye and whatever Violet had done to him before, and with Indarna's ability to blend in with her surroundings, Solus probably never saw her coming, which made her killing him a lot more plausible. Now, the revelation that Indarna was this rare 7th breed of dragon, that came together for me at about the same time it came together for Violet, which is very good for Yarros to keep the reader and the protagonist on the same level. Not too much, not too little to get us there. Violet was noticing something weird about her scales and their color, but I didn't know what that meant until Justinia said, "Hey, it sounds like there might be a 7th breed of dragon, but that can't be true." And it's like, oh yeah, that is totally it. Now, beyond even that foreshadowing, it just fits with the vibe of this story that the small and weak are going to bear the powers and responsibility of saving the world. So while we revere Terran for being the second biggest, baddest boy around, he's there to carry the girls who carry the weight of the world on their tiny, diminutive shoulders.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
And I can love him for that, because these girls need a fierce, protective papa when everyone else around them is dying or turning evil and or venom. Xaden. First, the reveal that Xaden was an intrinsic from 4th Wing onward. It's been so clear to me that Xaden is like the non-toxic version of Edward Cullen, and Edward Cullen was a mind reader, so it is not surprising that Xaden would be too. And in the end, Edward Cullen ultimately thirsted for the life force of his love, and yet did not indulge because he loved her so. So while Xaden's final revelation to Violet hit me like a gut punch, in the end, it did feel quite natural and totally was coming.
Say it.
Vampire.
But let's back up even further from that to the beginning, where It is clear that it's difficult for Xaden Ryerson to let people in, and that he is trying to let Violet in, but alas, he's not very good at it. So he created the question game, which does make sense when there's so much to talk about, and to let her decide what to address first is sort of fair. But still, later in the book, when he clearly can read her and know that she has questions about the deal he made with her mother, and yet isn't asking them for fear that it would ruin their relationship, like, he could have brought it up himself. Not that it's fair, since one scene Violet's always saying, I love him and nothing will ever change that. And then she's saying, well, maybe the answer to this question would. Like, him expecting her to fall out of love with him on the intrinsic reveal makes sense. And it's just not fair or reasonable what these two are doing to each other as they try to build up a strong method of communication. So not only was it really a high point to see those two actually just fight it out on the mat and fight for their relationship and clear communication before the Battle of Basgiath, but also Xaden trusting Violet with this now world-shattering secret that he's been in shows that they have built up a relationship that is now has to withstand that whole him turning into a soulless monster thing. This is an interesting dynamic that it's not the main character who is trying to get seduced to the dark side, but rather her seducer has turned to the dark side and now we're dealing with it. This seems to be a romance angle where men being soulless monsters is super easy, barely an inconvenience to overcome. So I look forward to exploring this as an epic fantasy read where that little problem can be quite difficult to overcome in the end. Tyrandor. Now, my first impression of Erasia from really the end of Fourth Wing was it was kind of Rivendell-y. Like, where else do you take your diminutive world-saving protagonist after they've been stabbed by a poisonous blade and need miraculous healing? But by the time Iron Flame rolls around, between Aragon, Frodo, Rand, and Violet's the only one who really just walks away with a kind of a cute scar that's super easy, barely an inconvenience. So the Rivendell rolls back a bit, and Erasia feels more Castle of the Beasts, as in it's kind of dark and gloomy, but also has art and books that isn't a lot, but they're free to access, unlike the archives that will totally kill you. But then, on my second read, when they were climbing the cliffs of Draelor, it occurred to me that should I have made that climb, I would have sounded like this at the bottom.
The way into Mordor. The secret stair.
Then I thought about it some more and realized that Tyrandor is a lot like Mordor in at least its unnatural geography and apparently a blasted out wasteland, at least according to the rumors at the beginning of Fourth Wing. And I really kind of like Yarros for doing this to us. Like, is Tyrandor and Erasia Mordor, or is it Rivendell? It might be a matter of perspective. Poor Emil. First and second time through, I was just as shocked and scandalized that Viscount Tikaris would dare to throw a guest to the mercy of an unhinged venin in his pit for entertainment. And then the third time, I realized that Xaden had just broken a marriage contract for Cat's hand, and her becoming the ruling lady of Tyrandor, whatever title that entails. And maybe in romance world, let me know down in the comments, breaking marriage contracts is super common, happens all the time easy to deal with, barely an inconvenience. But in certain epic fantasy, breaking one's word has consequences. Dire consequences. So, I think that sending Violet to a pit with a venom is, not the worst thing that could happen, actually. And I think this points to Karis being much more crafty than Violet believes him to be. Because she sees him as just a man with a beautiful, beautiful castle in a war-ravaged country. Now, this really kind of stretched my reading buddy's suspension of disbelief here, but I'm willing to buy it on the basis that the nobles of Paris danced and had balls all the way until the revolution broke down their door. And for whatever reason, the venom had not broken down to Karis's door yet. So it is good of him to try and keep his court spirits high while the rest of the world is falling apart. Limitations on magic. There is a combo of herbs that will remove the wielder's ability to communicate with their dragon and to wield. I wonder if it works on flyers. I will be referring to that as fork root, even though apparently it doesn't taste like mint, until Yarros gives us a better name for it. We also get to learn more about Griffin flyers and their power set, mostly explored through Kat and her emotional manipulation of Violet. I find it funny that Catriona would be, in Sanderson terms, a rioter, but she will never be a Ryerson. Now, I am glad that Violet did experiment and practice with her signet. Even if she isn't able to aim quite yet, it's still good to see her progress and learn more about it. In the final battle, it was the knowledge of runes that came in clutch. Runes are probably going to get their own video eventually, but for the plot right now and my more pressing questions, learning that it was a rune that gave the marked ones their marking and that Navarre covered it up to say, oh yeah, it totally came from a dragon, which isn't a lie, it's just omitting certain key truths, makes sense as Coda, it seems, is willing to fire a ward stone and save Bethsgaiath from venom, but he's not all that sympathetic to the Tyrish plot, at least that we can tell. Melgren did let them escape after all, so who knows? And I really have to commend Yarros for using each of these smaller facets of the magic system to build seamlessly into the big question, how to power a ward stone. And even there, when Violet finally does what I'm so used to Sanderson protagonists doing, and crack open a book, make some scientific experimentations, and start studying, Yarros is very careful to weigh it with emotional baggage too. Violet's guilt for when she fails the first time. Like a Sanderson protagonist is literally so happy to fail the first time because they know they're on the journey. Violet ain't got that self-confidence. And then when she and Dane finally start translating what could be very dry, Yarros has them discussing the consequences of Liam and Soleil's death on Dane's character arc. And to top it all off, Violet can only get herself confident enough to try that after Xaden gives her quite the pep talk on the throne. So it's not like the sex position that Jordan kind of pioneered and Game of Thrones used with ruthless efficiency. Rather, it's emotion expositioning. We get all the feels right alongside all the knowledge we need to know to resolve the final problem. The battle at Bethsgaiath. Now, while I love that Yarros makes it clear that it's Violet's ability to care about other people that makes her a hero, Yarros naturally had to give this hero the guilt complex of an epic fantasy hero, and Violet is now taking everything that goes wrong as personally her fault. even if it was the free will decision of others. And, once a protagonist starts a list of people that they have personally failed, that they rattle off in their heads, and they refuse to take names off the list, like that's never a good sign. So it did feel natural in the subjective way that, yeah, Violet would, of course, assume that it is her duty to imbue the ward stone at the end and save everyone, when objectively we know that that would kill Taryn and ruin Xaden, who would do something stupid. And he does. Now, he had said he wouldn't read her intentions and then goes ahead and reads her intentions before deciding to become Venom. And then so it's on both of them here. But yeah, Violet's martyrdom complex is something she definitely needs to work on in future books. For now, at least, Lilith Sorrengill demonstrates that she knows her daughter far better than Violet thought she did. And it does seem like Lilith honestly thought that her daughter could survive the Writer's Quadrant, even when Violet didn't think she would. So I can believe that Lilith was actually acting for the defense of her children by throwing them in the Writer's Quadrant and then offering herself up as the Iron Flame of Basgiath. So thank you, Lilith Sorrengill, for your service. It was literally the least you could do. Though I don't know what effect using Sloane Mari to off yourself with when she was not comfortable with that situation is going to have on the poor girl in the future. Now, Yarros has hooked me well and good again as Violet demonstrates her martyrdom complex and desire to save everyone, even if it means sacrificing herself, and Xaden's willingness to do basically anything, as explained by Varish in part 1 and then exploited by the Sage in part 2. He will do anything, even sell his soul, to save Violet from herself if necessary. So that's just a great dynamic that is going to be emotional wrecking in all the right ways. And we have 3 more books to explore this. So I will be back next week with a review of ONYX Storm, and then we've got theories to craft. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see any of that. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Bye!